Well, welcome everyone. I'm Nancy Hoffman-Banyek, CEO of the Greater San Fernando Valley Chamber, and we're so happy you're here today for our mid-year labor law update for 2022. We're very excited to partner for this event or this webinar with California Employers Association, CEA. They were founded in 1940 as a nonprofit employers association that serves over 10,000 businesses throughout California. And by the way, if you're a member of the chamber and you get a poster set from us, that's through our partnership with CEA that we gift to you. So you could thank them for that beautiful poster that keeps you out of other employee litigation. Their mission is to provide employers peace of mind, hence the poster sets, with exceptional HR compliance solutions, training, and recruiting services. And their three primary offerings are membership, consulting, and training. And by the way, we use them ourselves. We call them up for all sorts of things. CEA's consulting and training services help you as a California employer on a wide range of HR and management issues, including expertise in wage and hour compliance, employee handbooks, recruitment, union negotiations, and organizational development. They have 2 bilingual HR advisors on staff, and they're equipped to handle English and Spanish trainings. And I'm sure when I said like they help you with employee handbooks, some of you went, do I need an employee handbook? And you could contact Mary or Jessica to find out more if you need that. So let me introduce our speakers today. We have Jessica Hawthorne, JD. She's the Senior Vice President of CEA, and she previously acted as the California, wait, am I not, wait, Fumi, I'm only supposed to do the italic or no italic?
No, you can do both.
Okay. Well, Jessica's the Senior Vice President, manages CE's team of HR directors and the operations team. Jessica had conducted hundreds of investigations over the years, including sexual harassment investigations. She understands the complexities of workplace situations and is an expert at helping to determine credibility during the investigation process. She was always an engaging and dynamic speaker, so we're going to see that right now. Pressure's on Jessica, including many real-life examples in her training programs. She joined CEA in 2016 after serving as the Senior Employment Counsel and Manager of the Labor Law Hotline at the California Chamber, which is also their competitor then, right? And we're a member of the California Chamber too. So we have relationships with both. So I probably worked with you there too. She used her employment law knowledge and expertise to produce and conduct webinars and seminars, as well as contribute to Cal Chamber publications. And then Mary Bradford is, I don't know what PHR stands for.
That's Professional Human Resource Certificate.
Oh, I was going to guess that, but you know, Professional Human Resource. She is the HR director of CEA, and she is their HR advisor and trainer for the CEA, and she's an experienced human resource generalist. She has a Bachelor of Arts degree in Organization Communications from Cal State University, Sacramento, and her PHR is from the Society for Human Resource Management. She's an expert in California employment law and compliance matters. Again, pressure's on here, people. With an HR background in various industries and working with large and small businesses, she's familiar with challenges that managers and owners face with running a business in California, which, as we all know as business owner, is a lot. So let's welcome our presenters today and start the webinar.
Thanks, Nancy and Fumi, and thank you, San Fernando Valley Chamber of Commerce. We love our partnership with you guys, and thank you for sending our posters around. Our marketing team does that beautiful banner, and every year it's so exciting to see what banner they're going to come up with.
It's a beautiful poster. As you know, your former employer had really ugly posters, and we really like these.
Yeah, I do too. I agree. And those posters are super fun to edit every year, so I'll just throw that out there. So let's get going here. This is your mid-year labor law update. I can tell you that we wrote this in June and we've already revised it 5 times. So today is, what is today's date? Today is July 7th. So as of this moment, everything we say here will be accurate. I cannot promise it won't change tomorrow, but make sure you follow blogs or other resources so you can keep up to date on these things. Nancy did a great introduction on who we are at CEA. If you want more information about us, this is our contact information. I do want to clarify that Mary and I are not in the position to give you all legal advice. So if we say something and you say some expletive or some other comment about one of your practices in your business, and you think you're going to get in trouble, call your lawyer and get some private, confidential legal advice on that issue. If it's a general HR matter, that's what a place like California Employers Association can provide you support in. All right, today, the new world of work. We keep saying it's the new world, but it's an evolution of a world of work, I think. Employee wellness has really come to the forefront, and it's really impacting compliance. Typically, Mary's and my team speaks more to the compliance edge of things, but wellness is a necessary part of compliance anymore. It always has been, but it's really come to the forefront. So we are going to talk about that a little bit, and some more of the 2022 employer considerations in California. We don't know a lot about what's happening in 2023 yet. We'll have more information September, October, and then we'll do our 2023 labor law update. So we're really focusing right now on what's impacting you now and what we know will happen in January. So this new workplace, bunny slippers. Hopefully everybody has invested in a pair of comfortable shoes that fit under your desk that don't have to go to the office. And then you have another pair by the door to bring to the office. We go back and forth at CEA. We've got some folks who are hybrid, some are fully remote, some come in every day. And it really depends on the position and the work that they're doing. And every business is different, as we've learned throughout our little COVID tenure. But rather than doing a Zoom poll, we kind of just wanted to have you guys put in the chat, or I can't see hands, but if you throw in the chat, are people fully remote? Are you partially remote? Is everybody all in person?
How about using the reaction buttons? Like
that'd be good. Reaction buttons are, I can't see people, but Mary may be able to see people.
But you could look, if you open the participant window too, you could see.
That's right. You see the little, but are people fully remote?
What are you doing?
Thumbs up or hybrid? Give us a heart. Let us know. All right, we got a hybrid. You can use.
If you go down, people, to the bottom of your screen where it says reactions, you could click.
Seeing a number of hearts.
Mm-hmm.
All in person from someone else.
Couple all in person. All right.
Hey, ours is funny because Eric comes in the office and me and Fumi are hybrid, so he has a little thumbs up and we don't.
Most people are probably a little bit of everything going on.
A little bit of everything at this point, and then everybody started rolling back, and then the gas prices went through the roof. So everybody went, hold on, we're going to switch back to what we were before. And the other question is, how is it working for everybody? Give me a thumbs up if it's better than before, whatever you're doing that's different. And give me a heart if it's pretty much the same. And let me pull up the other reactions. I'm already blanking on reactions. Sorry, everybody. What's a third reaction, Mary?
How about if it hasn't worked out well, put the laughing sign.
There you go. Hot mess, but now we've got it.
Yeah, I know. Is there a hot mess emoji?
Yeah. Let's see.
Got lots of good thumbs ups.
Okay.
Hearts. So yeah.
All right, we got a smattering of everything. And, you know, that tracks with our experience. I mean, we take about 2,000 or 3,000 calls a month on our hotlines, and it really varies. And sometimes it varies depending on the day. Sometimes it's wonderful and other days not so much. So it's good to see that we're not jumping into uncharted waters here. So the thing that we talk about when managing remote workplaces, whether it's fully or partially or intermittent, is which departments are going to be treated a certain way. I mean, there are certain people, you know, operations probably needs to be in your office every day. People who are taking calls or just doing at home, doing projects on the computer may be able to work fully remote. It's really going to depend on a lot of different factors. And as managers and leaders, we really need to look at the why. Why is it okay for somebody to work from home? Or why, as managers, do we want people in the office? And it has to be a meaningful reason. I mean, we need to get past the, because if I see you, I know you're working, because that's probably not exactly accurate, especially if you've had people working remotely for the past couple of years. If people have been working effectively, why make that change? And there are very good reasons to make the change. You know, the culture of your organization is impacted by remote work. And so maybe, you know, once a quarter, once a month, you want everybody in the same place to reconnect. But think about those things and be strategic about why you're going to allow hybrid work, why you're going to allow remote work, or why you want everybody back in the office. The other thing to think about is headcount. Regardless of where people are working, if they're on your payroll, they count towards your headcount, and that really impacts leave laws, the supplemental paid sick leave under COVID. It impacts a lot of things. So even if you have people all over the country, that's going to impact your headcount for purposes of California compliance. We also really want to look at performance monitoring requirements. I mean, anybody sees TikToks about the things that you can put on your mouse so your mouse is moving, so your boss thinks you're working all day. That's not really the most effective way to figure out that your employees are working, right? If you know what your expectations are and the employees know what their expectations are, you can meet on a weekly or a monthly basis to determine if those things are being met. You don't want to check if somebody's mouse or if they've logged into their computer all day, because number one, that's a sign of distrust, and it's not giving you the information that you need. If somebody's performing effectively, you don't care if their mouse is moving or not. If they're doing a good job, their work is getting done and they're meeting deliverables, then that's what you're looking at. So you want to think about that, especially if you have folks working remotely, how you're going to determine if it's working. Because right now, there's no mandate that people work remote like it was at the beginning of this whole nonsense. Right now, there's flexibility, but that flexibility is a privilege, again, rather than a requirement. So if you're going to let people work remote, continue to let them work remote, or have some sort of hybrid situation, be clear what those expectations are and know what their designated work location is. If somebody is working full-time remote, they need to pick what that designated work location is. Probably their home, but that determines things like commute time, travel time, all those sort of things. Again, that intentionality aspect of, we want you here on Wednesdays. Okay, what happens on that Wednesday that is so magical that we all need to be here? Some workplaces, it's fantastic because everybody works remote, and then one day a week, everybody's there in one place. You can have a nice lunch together. People are having those water cooler conversations. Other work situations, such as ours, for example, we have people traveling on different days of the week. We have people doing trainings. If we picked one day a week, we may not even get everybody there on that day. So think about what the why and set the intention of the reason why you're going to have either total flexibility or limited flexibility. And with your hourly non-exempt folks, really, really important, if you're allowing flexibility to work away from your regular work site, how are you tracking their time? Are they clocking in? Are they clocking out for their meal breaks in a timely manner? All of those things. And you want to talk to them about commute time, business travel, and how those costs are going to be addressed. It's very important that we don't forget, Nancy mentioned at the top of our meeting here today, do I have to have an employee handbook? The answer is no. However, you kind of need to. It's a good idea. It's a best practice, highly recommended situation, because that's your opportunity to give employees information about your expectations. And when employees question expectations, then you have this nice little manual that says, well, in the handbook, it says this, and that's why we're doing it that way. Nice objective policy to follow. And remind your remote folks, these policies apply to you regardless of where you're sitting during your workday. With your remote folks or hybrid people, have a remote work agreement. That remote working agreement should clarify what expenses you're reimbursing, what your expectations are. I mean, little things like, I expect you to be dressed so that if I set a Zoom meeting in 5 minutes, you're not wearing a baseball hat. You want to be dressed appropriately, just like you're coming to the office, if you want to have that policy. So think about everything you want your remote workers. Are you going to have mandatory meetings, check-in times, things like that? Still going to be at-will employees. Anti-harassment policies are still going to apply. And be very clear about what expenses you're covering and come up with those reasonable costs. You also want to be sure employees have copies as well as access to your employee handbook if you have it, an injury illness prevention program. All employers in California with 10 or more employees must have a written injury illness prevention program. And also, don't forget about our favorite CPP. That CPP, at least through this year, is going to be required. So you want to make sure you either use CalOSHA's template or you create your own. The template is easy. It's a plug and play, very easy to create, and hopefully you already have that in place. On our website, regardless of whether you're a member, employers.org, we have a COVID-19 resources page with a COVID-19 prevention plan, a couple sample policies and things like that as well, that anybody can access if you want some more information on that. So hiring during this time has been a challenge. I mean, I don't know how you guys have been. We've hired a lot of folks during COVID, and we have one person who started, and I'd met him 3 or 4 times via Zoom, and he showed up for his first day of work, and he's 6'5". I had no idea. I'm 5'5". It's like, wow, you're very tall. You know, you're used to seeing somebody from here to here. It's fun to meet them in person and figure out that we all are taller than our shoulders and heads. But beyond just getting to know people personally, which you can do very effectively over Zoom, you want to be clear with folks what your work expectations are. Are you going to allow this position to be hybrid or remote, or do you expect them to be in the office certain amounts of times? How are they going to be checking in? Are there weekly meetings? Are there monthly meetings? Here's your job description. Here's your performance evaluation plan. All of those things so people understand what the expectations are so they can meet them, give them an opportunity to meet those. Your managers who are interviewing should be trained on hiring virtually. It's a virtual world at this point. People are all over the country applying for jobs in different places. People should be comfortable at this point in this format, looking at their own face, checking out their own hair while interviewing people in Nevada to come to Southern California, for example. And sometimes there's a different dynamic there. And you also want to think about, do you want people who you're hiring to be tech savvy? And if they're not tech savvy, you can figure that out pretty quickly over a Zoom call, right? But think about all of those things and have your managers comfortable in this space when you're trying to hire virtually. As far as new hire paperwork, when you're onboarding somebody, a lot of people have been onboarding people virtually. We're evolving back to in-person, but that I-9 flexibility that went into effect at the beginning of COVID has been extended through October 31st of this year. And what that means is if you have a completely remote workforce, nobody works at the main work site, you can review the I-9 documents virtually. And then once you're working on site again, you have 3 days to actually look at the real documents in person. You can also just determine an authorized representative. Like if you're hiring somebody in Eureka and you have another employee who's in Yreka, maybe you have that person go and look at the I-9 documents. There's different options in that area, and there's really good guidance in the USCIS M-274 document. It's a very comprehensive guide, but very useful if you have I-9 questions. Just also a little heads up, the USCIS is updating the instructions for the Form I-9 and some of the document, and we expect that change to go into effect around October. They are not great about being on time with changes, but we are offering a free webinar from the USCIS in October. So if you want any updates for that, keep an eye out for that. Again, performance management. How do we make sure we're holding people accountable for their deliverables? And that's going to look different for every employee in every department. But that's also a matter of building trust up and down, meaning just because I'm the boss doesn't mean I can tell this person and tell this person to behave a certain way, but not hold myself accountable. A lot of people come up with that question of, how do I know they're working? Or she says she's going to go pick up her kids, but then she's gone for a half an hour instead of 15 minutes. Well, why don't you have a conversation with that employee? Are you comfortable with the employee taking 15 to 30 minutes to go pick up their kids? If you're not, have that discussion. Or build up that trust so the employee can say, you know, normally I have my neighbor pick up my kid. I got to go pick up my kid today. My neighbor's sick. Is that okay? Of course that's okay. Or no, that's not okay. Whatever the conversation is, let your employees trust you. So if they do need flexibility outside the scope of what you've already agreed upon, that they feel comfortable telling you about it. Because if people start hiding their behavior from you as their supervisor, then you have bigger problems. All right, let's move on to wage and hour, which is everybody's favorite because everybody likes to get paid, but California likes to make that very difficult, don't we? So first and foremost, we have a state minimum wage in California, but we also have about 39 local minimum wages. And those local minimum wages, they're mostly coastal. You guys know LA County, LA City, Santa Monica, San Diego, different minimum wages down there. The Bay Area has a bunch of different minimum wages as well. Most go up on January 1 of each year, but about 15 of those minimum wages went up on July 1st, so last week. So make sure you know what those increases are. You have employees in West Hollywood, you know there's big changes there. We have a list of local minimum wages and paid sick leave requirements. Here's a bit.ly if you want that. Anybody can access that information. That fact sheet keeps getting longer, but feel free to download that so you know all the local minimum wages. The reason why that's important beyond just my office is in West Hollywood, so I know the minimum wage went up, is if you have people who are working remotely or hybrid in locations different from where you are located. So for example, let's say your home office is in Fresno. Fresno follows the state minimum wage, which is significantly lower than the local minimum wages in the LA and Bay Area. If your main office is in Fresno, but you have an employee who lives and works out of their home office in West Hollywood, and they're an hourly worker, that employee gets paid the West Hollywood rate, not the Fresno rate. So if everybody gets paid based on where they're working. So it's really important to know that if you have hourly workers. So the state minimum wage, which is lower than all those local minimum wages, right now, if you have 25 or fewer employees, is $14 an hour. If you have 26 or more employees, it is $15 an hour. These numbers are important because they directly impact the minimum salary that you pay your exempt employees. So you have hourly non-exempt employees. In California, our state assumes everybody you hire is an hourly non-exempt employee. You can establish they're exempt from being an hourly employee, meaning they're exempt from overtime, meal and rest breaks, if they meet the job duties requirement outlined in the wage orders and they earn this minimum salary. So both of those things have to be true. And we don't care how much exempt employees work. They have to meet the job duties and they have to meet that minimum salary. So they could work 5 hours a week. If they meet the job duties and they're earning this minimum salary, they're exempt. Okay. This is important because let's say you have those WeHo employees. We don't care what the minimum wage is in WeHo for purposes of exempt salary. We only care about the state. On January 1, 2023, based on the law that was passed about 5 years ago, we expected that everybody would get up to $15 an hour with the minimum exempt salary at $62,400. Well, there's a little exemption in there for high inflation. And I don't know if anybody's heard, but yes, we are in a very high inflation time. So we are expecting for January 1, 2023 for all employers, the minimum wage to be at $15.50 an hour instead of the $15 that we expected. Of course, the local minimum wages are going to be higher January 1. But what the $15.50 an hour means is that the minimum salary for exempt employees is going to be $64,480. That is a huge jump, especially if you have 25 or fewer employees. From 58, I mean, that's over a $6,000 raise. So this is a caution to folks who have exempt employees on the lower end of that exempt salary, that January 1, if your budget doesn't support a $6,000 raise or whatever raise to get somebody to $64,480, you're going to have those folks be hourly non-exempt employees. And I would recommend if you have exempt employees that you have to change to non-exempt, give them some ramp up time to get used to tracking their time, taking meal breaks and so forth. And typically what people do is they take the salary, divide it by 2080, and that's the hourly rate that they're going to pay the employee. But it is a challenge. I mean, anybody who's been exempt for most of their career, if somebody said to you, you need to clock in, you need to clock out for a meal break, all those sort of things, you're going to say, meal break? When was the last time anybody took a meal break? I mean, my plate sits perfectly next to my laptop and my big monitor. you're going to have to make those adjustments. But if you have folks making, $70,000, $80,000, you don't have to worry about it. But the other thing to think about is wage compression, right? So if you have somebody who's making $70,000 a year and they have somebody who reports to them that suddenly is going to be at 64,480, you may need to look at raising that person up so everybody has the right amount and there's that balance in your workforce. So a lot to think about if you have folks on sort of this cusp of exempt salary. All right, so I'm just gonna throw this out here rather than having you guys fill out the little emojis, since I am emoji vacant at this point. But reimbursement is really important, and it's something to think about as you have people working in different spaces, working from home, traveling around, whatever those things, and thinking about what expenses we reimburse and what expenses should we reimburse. And the reason why this is important, number one, because we have a labor code that tells us we have to reimburse some things, but we also have plaintiffs' attorneys who are pushing the envelope on what they think employers should be reimbursing. So let's talk about that for a second. Let's start with what the law says. So it's Labor Code 2802. If you get excited about reading statutes, feel free to Google that. You have to reimburse your employees for all necessary expenses and losses incurred due to performing their job. What does that mean? It means a lot. So if I am using my own vehicle, if I have to buy a computer in order to work from home, all of those things are things that an employer likely has to reimburse employees for. Let's start with mileage. If I'm using my personal vehicle for work purposes, you have to reimburse me for my mileage. Our labor commissioner, the Department of Industrial Relations, our labor commissioner has said that the IRS reimbursement rate is a reasonable reimbursement rate for purposes of Labor Code 2802. Up until July 1, the IRS reimbursement rate was 58.5 cents. Well, the IRS got the memo that gas prices have gone up just a tiny bit. And so reimbursement rate got jacked up to 62.5 cents per mile. So effective last Friday, reimbursement for employees using their using their own personal vehicle for work purposes is 62.5 cents per mile. All right. If you're requiring remote work or hybrid work, or you're strongly encouraging it, maybe you downsized and you have workspace for 3 people, but you got 10 employees. So you're encouraging this hybrid workspace. One thing to consider is covering at least basic work from home costs, covering internet, personal cell phone usage, office equipment, likely some utilities even, and think about a reasonable percentage of the total cost. So for example, let's say somebody pays $100 a month for their home internet and they work from home 3 days a week. Well, they're not using $100 worth of that internet 3 days a week. Maybe they're using 25%. So you and the employee can agree mutually in your remote work agreement, 25% seems like a reasonable amount of what I use my internet for purposes of work, for example. Another way to do it is look at all the expenses and come up with a monthly stipend that everybody agrees is a reasonable amount based on the employee's costs. This has come up a lot in court. We've seen cases where plaintiffs' attorneys are saying you have to pay for our office furniture. Now, office furniture is different than accommodation. So let's say I have a back issue and my doctor says I need a particular type of chair. Yes, employers pay for that chair. Let's say I need a new desk at home. Typically, that's not something the employer needs to pay for. There's plenty of flat surfaces in your workspace, right? Well, plaintiffs' attorneys are pushing this and saying, if we're required to work from home, this was not something I contemplated, so I need to go buy something in order to do that effectively. We don't know the answer to that for. Some plaintiffs' attorneys are saying rent space. Employees are saying, I could rent out this room in my house and get X amount of dollars a month, but now I have to use it for my home office. We don't know how these are going to play out. Some companies used to provide a meal benefit. And so the people who are in the office are getting the meal benefit, but the people from home aren't. And so plaintiffs' attorneys are saying, well, they should get the meal benefit. We don't know. And that's the challenge that, as we all as employers know, we want to be reasonable. We want to give employees flexibility where we can, but we don't want to expose ourselves to liability at the same time. Reasonableness always wins the day, almost always. I mean, there's always going to be those outliers. We all have had those employees at one point or another in our life. But for the most part, if people want the flexibility, they're going to make that work. So as employers, we say, okay, here are the expenses we're going to cover. Tell me about, or bring me your monthly bill, and let's talk about, let's break this down, and here, let's agree to the reasonable amount. And then having that agreement that if those expenses change and the employee believes that the amount of reimbursement is no longer reasonable, they must promptly notify you as the employer so you can meet again and revise that agreement. So have those conversations and put it on the employee that if this changes, you need to tell me. Otherwise, I'm going to assume that this agreement that we both agree that everything is reasonable is still effective. All right, so we've got a couple FAQs over the past year or so. So we have, what if an employee is permitted to come to the office at any time, but is choosing to remotely work voluntarily? They're, you say, we've got office space for you, come in anytime, and the employee is like, nah, I'm good, I'm going to stay at home. And this is where it's gotten very, very muddy. We've seen conflicting responses from this topic from varying attorneys, from the labor commissioner, from court cases. So we, as HR advisors, advise best practices. And best practices is some portion of work from home costs, a reasonable amount that you agree on with the employee, and the employee also agrees that this is reasonable. The alternative is you're not going to be allowed to work from home anymore. There's no more remote work. Everybody's coming to the office. It may not work for our organization if we're going to be nickel and diming and negotiating every other day about how much these costs actually are. So those are kind of people's options, right? Another question we've gotten is, if an employee was working remotely during COVID because of stay-at-home order, am I required to reimburse work from home costs? Meaning they're mandated and they're able to work from home. So rather than you just saying you can't work at all, we're going to send you home, you can work from home because of the stay-at-home order. Well, a California federal court said, yes, you do have to reimburse those work from home costs. This was a recent Amazon case in a federal court. Amazon had to pay work from home expenses for the period of time during the mandated shutdown orders. So mandatory work from home is very different and at least more clear. Yes, you do have to pay. So please check out your in-person and remote hiring practices, as well as your remote and reimbursement policies. Make sure they're very clear, make sure everybody's on board. And if you have the flexibility to say, well, if working remotely doesn't work, everybody gets to come back here. We can all work from the office. That works very well. We've got everything you need here, or we can come up with this reasonable reimbursement policy. Check your county and city minimum wage, especially if you have hourly workers working remote, or if you have hourly workers traveling, because most of these minimum wages kick in if you work 2 hours or more in a jurisdiction. So pay attention to that. And check out your exempt employees' salaries, because those are going up January 1. And if that salary goes below that minimum, then those folks really do have to be hourly employees. All right, employee wellness, CFRA, we're going to get into this a little bit. Benefits have come up, and again, I'm just going to throw this out there as something for you all to think about. Are you adding new benefits? Have you changed your benefit package, your comp package, to attract new people or keep the people that you do have? Are you able to have flex time? I mean, some businesses have to have set office hours. Others, you can be pretty flexible. And if somebody, let's say somebody's decided, if I can work from 6 to 2, that works way better for me, because then I can pick up my kids, because my partner has to work from 12 to 8. If you're able to work those things out, maybe that's a good opportunity to retain good employees. Gym memberships, some people are doing pet insurance. There's a lot of different flex benefits. If you want to throw in the chat just to share with your compatriots here, other things that you have implemented that you found success with so we can learn from each other, that would be great too as we're chatting along here. But I know most employers are trying to find different things that they can do to retain employees, especially if your budget doesn't sustain a lot of salary increases or bonuses. So wellness, as I mentioned at the top of our program here, it's become imperative and employees are expecting it and needing it. And start at the top. If you go on vacation, don't email your employees when you're on vacation. Model that behavior. That vacation is important. Block it out. People need that time, and that you don't expect your employees when they're on vacation to be reaching out or responding to emails. Have ongoing conversations with your team about their workload, whether it's weekly or monthly. How are you doing? Some months are going to be busier than others, but if you notice that one particular employee or a couple of your employees are kind of burning it at both ends month after month, you're going to need to make some adjustments or that person's going to get burnt out. You want to stay ahead of that. And you as a leader can help your employees prioritize tasks. I'm working with an organization right now and the employees are saying, I don't need a one-on-one with my boss. I mean, what do I need? I mean, I just go and do my job. And the boss is like, but I want to talk about your workload. I want to make sure that you're prioritizing things properly, that you're not doing too much, that I'm giving you the right resources so you can do your job effectively. It's not a matter of me wanting to micromanage your time. I'm here to support you and give you the resources you need to be successful. And if I'm not talking to you on an ongoing basis, how am I going to do that? So that open communication is really important. So an employee can say to you comfortably, I have nothing to do right now. Is everybody else really busy? Because I would love to take something off their plate. Or on the opposite end, I am exhausted. I'm burnt out. Help me out. I've got 20 things on my to-do list. And you as a leader and objective person can look at their list and say, oh, let me take that from you. Or, oh, that's not important. Or, let's talk this through. Look at your benefits. Do you have an employee assistance program through your healthcare? That may be an opportunity for employees to get additional help. And think about perks or other programs, like the gym memberships, bringing in lunch, little things or big things, whatever your budget can sustain that shows employees that you value the commitment that they've made to your company. But most importantly, from the compliance perspective, give people time off when you're required to by law. And that brings us to CFRA. So CFRA is our California Family Rights Act. And the California Family Rights Act used to be the direct companion to the Federal Family Medical Leave Act. Well, 2 years ago, both of these laws apply to employers with 50 or more employees. Well, starting last year, 2021, CFRA applies to employers with 5 or more employees. So you are a covered employer under CFRA if you have 5 or more employees. What does that mean? That means you have to have a policy. You have to have a CFRA poster. And if you have our beautiful poster, it's already on there. And there are mandatory forms that you have to use when somebody requests leave that may fall under CFRA. So if you are a covered employer, an eligible employee is somebody who's worked for you for 12 months and 1,250 hours in the 12 months prior to the need for leave. So once you have an eligible employee, they're going to be eligible for up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave. That means they can take that time. You don't pay them. You do continue their health benefits. They pay their portion, and they have guaranteed reinstatement to their position or a substantially or pretty much close to exact position they had prior to their leave. So important note, especially for smaller employers who always have followed pregnancy disability leave, CFRA runs separately from pregnancy disability leave. So if you have 5 or more employees, make sure you do have a CFRA policy. You've got that poster hanging up and you're prepared with the forms, because an employee doesn't have to say, hello, boss, I would like time off under the California Family Rights Act. They just need to say, I'm getting surgery, or my mother is ill and I need to take time off to care for her. Those are trigger events for you as the employer to say, oh, I have to use these mandatory forms because Jessica was talking about this. So you be prepared for when an employee says, I need time off. And that's, again, why it's really important to have a policy, because you'll say, she said something about sick mother or they need time, and look at your policy and say, oh, that's right, CFRA. So now I'm going to work with this employee to accommodate this leave. These are all the covered reasons that somebody can take time off under CFRA. Baby bonding is the biggie. You know, birth of a child, adoption, foster care. That's just time to bond with the new child. People can take time off for their own health condition if certified by their doctor. Pregnancy is not considered a health condition under CFRA. If somebody is disabled due to pregnancy, that's what pregnancy disability leave is for. If you have an employee with family in the armed forces, a qualifying exigency, meaning somebody's being called up and I need time off to get the legal paperwork in order, that is protected time off under CFRA, as well as caring for a family member. And that list of family members under CFRA is lengthy. Sister-in-laws, parents, grandparents, all those folks, employees can take time off to care for, including parent-in-law. Parent-in-law is new for 2022. So make sure if you had a 2021 CFRA policy, you've updated your policy for 2022 to include parent-in-law as a covered family member. There is this great mediation pilot program for employers with 5 to 19 employees. So if an employee files a claim with the Department of Fair Employment and Housing saying that you interfered or violated their rights under CFRA, it is mandatory to go through this mediation program. This is a protection for you as the employer. So this is a great program. The DFEH is required to notify the employee, hey, you filed this claim, but you have to go through mediation first. And this is a great way to really limit the liability in these circumstances, because there's a lot to know under CFRA and CFRA compliance. So this is an opportunity to educate you as the employer and the employee, and also limit your liability. All right, maybe in the chat box, I am curious about this one. Because of CFRA applying to more employers, we're curious in the past couple of years if your leave of absence requests have increased, thumbs up, they've decreased, thumbs down, or no noticeable change, heart. I got my emoji game back. So stick either, next to stick your little emoji in there. What do we got? What do we got, Mary?
Well, leave has sparked some questions. That is for sure. Let's see.
All right, let's do it.
Let's see. Sorry, I've got to bring back participants. Oh, we've got a thumbs up.
All right.
Let's see. I can double check on the participant side. I've been monitoring the chat.
So increased, thumbs up. Decrease, thumbs down. Taylor Swift, no noticeable change. Heart emoji.
Heart just stayed the same.
All right. All right. So we have leave questions too, Mary?
Well, we just had a question, good old CFRA, which is a big leave for small employers to manage, because that applies, as Jessica said, if you have 5 or more. We had a question, if for CFRA, do they have to take the 12 weeks consecutively, or can they take it at any time within a year? I'm assuming this is for baby bonding. So,
well, I'll answer it for both.
Sure.
So let's say I have surgery and my doctor says I need to be out for 2 weeks, and then I can only work 4 hours a day for the following 6 weeks. That is perfectly legitimate under CFRA. And one of the best ways to do that is CFRA is the equivalent of 12 work weeks, which is about 480 hours. And in that mandatory paperwork, there's a designation notice. You can tell the employee how much time they have, and then you track it. So really the medical certification is key in those circumstances, whether it's caring for a family member or the qualifying exigency or my own health condition, because the doctor is going to dictate how much time you need. For baby bonding, to Mary's point, that's a little bit more precise. So you can mandate 2-week minimum increments, except for on 2 or more occasions that you and the employee mutually agree upon. So if an employee says, I want to take baby bonding, which has to be taken within a year after the birth of the baby or placement of the child, and the employee says, but I just want to take every Friday off for the next 52 weeks. You do not have to agree to that. It can be 2-week increments, but I've talked to a lot of businesses that say, actually, I'd rather them take every Friday off for 52 weeks rather than chunks of time. So that works great for me.
It can work out really well. Yeah.
Yeah. So mutually agreeable on 2 or more occasions, but typically it's 2-week minimum increments. Because again, the idea is to bond with the child. So have that dedicated time. Do you have any others?
I think I'm caught up on the others.
All right.
So, good.
Am I passing this over to you now?
Excellent. Please do.
All right. All right. Let's stop the share.
Excellent. I'm going to reshare because.
Can I just interrupt really quick because I'm going to leave in a few minutes. But since you're talking about CFRA and everything, and if people do have employees going on paid family leave, the chamber has a grant available for businesses. So if you have an employee go out on paid family leave, starting this past June up until May 2024, your business could apply for this grant and get up to $2,000 per employee on paid family leave. It's pretty easy to apply for. And Femi could put the email or the website in the chat. And the chamber just got this $500,000 grant. And we'd love to help businesses that have people out on paid family leave.
That's awesome. And I'll clarify that too for people. So let's say somebody goes out on CFRA for baby bonding or to care for a family member. Because that's unpaid time, the state provides up to 8 weeks of paid family leave, which is about 70% of your salary. But the San Fernando Chamber has applied for this grant to supplement that by $2,000.
But that goes to the employer, the $2,000.
Yeah. And so that's a huge boon to pay you back for that lost time. But just for clarification, paid family leave is that wage replacement supplement. So when somebody goes out on leave, it's either because of CFRA or because you're granting personal leave that they may become eligible for that PFL money. But yeah, definitely, that's a great opportunity, San Fernando.
Just so you know, Jessica, Mary, you could tell anyone that this is available. Anyone in the state, they don't have to be our members. So any of your members that you want to tell about, happy to throw your logo on as a partner as well.
We should write we'll put an article on our blog, Nancy, if you want to do that.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Email me.
Okay, I will.
All right.
And I have to leave here at 11 for a lunch, so I'm going to turn everything over to Fumi in a few minutes. And I want to thank everyone for being here. And thank you, Jessica and Mary.
Thanks, Nancy.
Thanks, Nancy.
All right, I'll go hide. It's all you, Ms. Bradford.
All right. Well, Jessica filled you in on lots of good things, potentially nightmare-inducing for some of you, but that's okay. Here's what I want to tell you before we start to get into COVID, because Jessica might have said some things where you thought, oh my gosh, I have not been doing that. I have no idea what that is. And it's quite possible I'm going to tell you some things and you're going to say, oh my gosh, we've never done that. So here's what I just want to encourage you to do. Give yourself a little bit of grace. It has been very busy 2.5 years and lots to manage. And so what you want to do is we give you this information. If you've made some errors, let's work on correcting those. And then let's just make sure moving forward, we're following all the guidelines and doing everything that you want to make sure you're doing as an employer. And we know there is a lot. So let's start talking just for a little bit about COVID, because there are some things that have been going on. As Jessica mentioned, things change frequently. So we're giving you the information as of the 7th of July. But when it comes to figuring out how you manage your employees with COVID and those kind of issues in the workplace, I'm sure everyone has heard of CalOSHA. And they are the ones who are giving us what are known as these ETS, Emergency Temporary Standards, and that's giving employers guidance on what they're supposed to do. So what we want to recommend that you think about, depending on your industry, I know we have lots of people from lots of different backgrounds, you might need to work with a safety expert on some of these things, because if you're a high-risk environment, it might make more sense for you to work with a safety specialist. It's always a good idea, as Jessica said, we can't give you legal advice. It's not a bad idea to have an attorney you can consult with for some of these things, because as we know, it's just becoming a more complicated world. California was complicated to start with, just keeps going down that path. So it's a good idea to make sure you've got those two options that you're considering. Now, as Jessica mentioned before, because we like lots of acronyms, she talked about the CPP, the COVID prevention plan. Well, there's also an IPP, an injury illness prevention plan. She also mentioned that needs to be a written document if you have 10 or more employees. And again, update your CPP. If you updated it last year, I promise you it's out of date for some of the new things that have gone into effect in the past couple of months, especially those May 6 changes. So we just want to make sure you are as up to date as possible. All right, so here are our COVID workplace standards. These were the big changes May 6th. Now, here's the good news. They made it a lot more clear for employers, which I certainly appreciate. I think Jessica does too. Pretty much everyone on our team, we like clear answers so we can tell businesses the clearest answer possible. But what the ETS said is that, you know what, we're going to defer to the California Department of Public Health, the CDPH, regarding exclusion periods for employees, quarantine, isolation, all of those kind of things, which was great because prior to that, they were kind of managing on their own. We had two different agencies, sometimes giving us two different guidance, which, as you can imagine, led to some confusion. So now the ETS defer to the CDPH, which is great. It makes it a lot easier. So they say, go check the CDPH for current guidelines. And I've got those slides for you here. The other change they made is they said vaccination status is no longer relevant. If you remember the previous guidelines, there were certain standards if you had been vaccinated or if you had received a booster or if you had been unvaccinated, and it got a little confusing. So now they've taken out vaccination status when it comes to what do we do when somebody is exposed or if somebody tests positive. Now, what I'm going to tell you are the general state guidelines. Again, just like minimum wage, Jessica was talking about, you always want to check with local city and counties to see if they have their own guidelines as well. Now, I know we've got a couple of CEA members on the call. If you're a CEA member, you can access our COVID exposure toolkit, which really takes you step by step whenever you have a COVID exposure in the workplace. And this, of course, is constantly updated as these changes come about. All right, so here we go. Number one, we have an employee who tests positive. What do we do? First of all, it's probably happened numerous times in your workplace already, but either way, we just take a deep breath and say, okay, here's how we're going to handle this. So if an employee tests positive, they need to be home for at least 5 days. So that means they're away from the workplace, they're at home. Now that 5 days can start from the start of symptoms. Normally people start feeling not so well and then they go get a test, or sometimes they just might get a test and say, oh, I'm COVID positive. Either way, we need to be home 5 days from the start of the symptoms or that positive test. Now, if they're able to return to work, we'll talk about that in just a second, they're going to make sure they're wearing a mask for 10 days. So we've got 5 days and 10 days as kind of our guidelines that we're taking a look at. Now, isolation can end after day 5. They can come back to work if after day 5, they take another test and it's negative and their symptoms are resolving. Now, if symptoms other than fever are not resolving, they need to stay home, isolate until those symptoms are resolving, or it's after day 10. Then they're able to come back to work. Now, if for some reason they can't test or they choose not to test or they test positive on day 5, then they need to be in isolation and stay away from the workplace for 10 days. So we've got our 5-day rule and our 10-day rule. Keep those in mind as we go through the other options here. Now, if somebody is exposed to a COVID positive person, so 3 to 5 days of that last exposure, they're going to also wear a well-fitting mask around others for 10 days, especially in any indoor settings. Now, if symptoms develop, then they should head home, make sure that they're not in the workplace, and remain in isolation while they're waiting for those results. Now, if they're not tested, they can continue isolation for 10 days after those symptoms started to come about, and then they can return to work. Now, our next category is for somebody who has symptoms. Now, this is one of those reminders because we've had lots of questions. We're up in the Sacramento Valley. I know you're in the San Fernando Valley. Valley areas have lots of allergy issues. And so we've had crazy allergies up in the Sacramento area for several months now, just all the blooming and harvesting and everything that's going on up here. So sometimes people are having symptoms that may not be COVID, but they're very similar to COVID. So this is just a good reminder. Anytime an employee is not feeling well, if they have the stomach flu or food poisoning or COVID, whatever it is, let's make sure we don't have those people in the workplace, right? We don't want them exposed to anybody else. So this is where somebody has symptoms, let's get them home and let's get checked just to make sure it's okay for them to be in the workplace. So if somebody has COVID-like symptoms, they should self-isolate and test as soon as possible to see if they have it. They should remain in isolation while they're waiting for those results. And again, if they don't test, then they need to continue isolating for 10 days after those symptoms started. They're also supposed to wear that well-fitting mask for 10 days. And they should continue self-isolation and retesting in 1 to 2 days if they test negative with an antigen test, particularly if they're tested during the first day or two of symptoms. I can tell you, I have a niece who's over in Europe right now, wasn't feeling well. She tested negative for 4 days, and then on day 5, she tested positive, and she had to start her isolation. That sometimes happens when people are experiencing those symptoms. They just sometimes don't show up right away, even though you're pretty sure you have it. So there were a couple of changes when it comes to testing as well. So they still want people who are COVID positive to test on day 5. They're still required to test on day 5 before they're able to return to work. Now, the good news is when it comes to testing is they're not restricting the type of test. Before they would say it needs to be a PCR test, it needs to be monitored by somebody else. There were a lot of restrictions, and we all remember when it was for a while, it was really difficult to get in to get a test, or there were certain variables that just didn't make it real conducive to going to get a test. So now what they're saying is an employee can self-administer and self-read their COVID test, so they can take an at-home test as long as they provide some independent verification for you. So that means they need to send you a picture of the test. Ideally, if it has a timestamp on it, if they can show in some way that it was taken today at a certain time, kind of like it reminds me of if there's ransom, not that anyone should be ransomed, but they would show a newspaper or they would show the TV and behind them that says the date and the time, something along those lines, just so you can verify that that test was taken today. So it made it a lot easier. In the past, they wouldn't allow someone to self-administer and self-read. You as an employer were supposed to sit there for 15 minutes watching the employee swab their nose while the test developed. So I'm happy to say that we don't have those guidelines required anymore. So they can self-administer as well as self-read that COVID test. Now, I want to remind you about a couple of regulations when it comes to reporting COVID in the workplace. A lot of employers kind of thought these went away or forgot about them. So you do want to make sure you're following these. Okay, it's a 3-2-1 rule. So within 3 business days of an employee notifying you that they are COVID positive, you want to contact your workers' comp carrier and let them know about it, even if it's not work related. So even if your employee says, hey, I was at my cousin's wedding and a bunch of people tested positive and I just took a test and I'm positive, had nothing to do with work, you are still supposed to report that to your workers' comp carrier. Now, most workers' comp carriers are very familiar with this. Even on their webpage, if you go visit their webpage, it's kind of the first thing that pops up, reporting a COVID positive employee. So a lot of them are really great with it. I have heard of a couple of worker comp carriers that were a little thrown off by this and said, oh, if it's not work related, we don't want to know about it. I would still document that you attempted to contact your workers' comp carrier to let them know, just so you can show that you've been doing the due diligence. All right, here's our 2-day rule or 48-hour rule. So you need to report any outbreaks to local public health agencies within 48 hours or 1 business day, whichever is later, if you have 3 or more cases within a 14-day period. Now, this might have already happened to you. You know, we've had a couple of big swings where there's a high positivity rate and then it kind of drops and a high positivity rate. So you might have already done this, but do just keep in mind, if you have 3 or more cases within a 14-day period, 14 calendar days, you do want to contact your local public health agency. And then we have the 1-day rule. So you need to make sure you're distributing written notice to your employees when they are exposed within 1 business day. Now, there was a recent change back in early June when they kind of changed the guidelines of what it means to be exposed. It used to just mean if you were within 6 feet for 15 or more cumulative minutes during a day, that was considered exposed. Now it's much more broad. It's pretty much anybody who would have been in the airspace with that particular employee. So if they were in the same building, if they were in the same work area, then it's possible this is going to increase the number of employees that you're going to need to notify. But just keep in mind, this is one of those things you just want to let employees know. Say, hey, we've had a COVID positive employee, you were in the same building with them, we're letting you know that this happened. Make sure you do that within 1 business day. So let's talk a little bit about exclusion pay. Now, this is one of those that might surprise some of you, so get ready. So if your employee has to be sent home and they're isolating following a work-related exposure, you are required to continue and maintain their pay, their seniority, all of their other rights while they're waiting to get those test results. So if they are excluded from the workplace, you need to maintain their pay as long as it was a work-related exposure. Now, this is, Jessica talked a lot about remote working, and obviously we've all been dealing with a lot more remote working or hybrid working, but this is one of those situations where if you can have your employee continue to work from home, great, have them continue to work from home. This might be something for you to consider, maybe grabbing a couple of extra laptops that you have for the office, and you can send people home with a laptop if they need to be home isolating. Or again, look at putting some of those remote policy workers in place if you've got people who are going to be working remotely. But this is a situation where you have to maintain their pay anyway. So if they're able to do work from home, fantastic. Now, of course, if somebody is sick and not feeling well, we don't want to require them to work. We want them to rest and get better. But if it's an option for you to have them work from home, fantastic. Have them work from home while you're continuing to pay them, while they're waiting to get any of those test results from being exposed to that. Another law, and this is one that has come and gone and changed and really kept us on our toes, is supplemental paid sick leave, or SPSL, as it is known. Now, you might remember all the way back in 2020, so long ago, everybody, the FFCRA. So that was the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, because again, we love acronyms, everybody. But there was FFCRA and there was supplemental paid sick leave. And then FFCRA ended. Supplemental paid sick leave went away for a little while, but then it came back in 2022. It actually was signed, I believe it was early March, late February, it was signed, and then it was retro back to January. So as of right now, we still have supplemental paid sick leave in California, but it only applies if you have 26 or more employees. So this is for a larger, considered a larger employer in California. That is in effect from January 1st. It is set to expire September 30th. Will it get extended? I don't know. We will just have to hang in there and see. So another great reason, make sure you sign up for our newsletters, you're checking our blog, because we will certainly keep you updated as soon as we know of any changes. But this is where we have up to 2 buckets, or really 40 hours of 2 buckets for a total of 80 hours. There are 2 buckets of paid leave. Now, this is just paid leave that you're giving to your employee. This is separate from regular California paid sick leave. They can't be combined, they can't be used like that. These are separate, this is a separate benefit. Again, only if you have 26 or more employees. Now, the big change with this, which is different than anything else we've seen, is that you're required to show the amount of supplemental paid sick leave used on an employee's pay stub. So this is one of those great reasons. I'm going to show you kind of a sample pay stub in just a little bit. But make sure you're working with your payroll carrier to make sure everything that should be on a pay stub is on a pay stub. One of the new things you need right now, if this applies to you, is the amount of SPSL that an employee has used year to date. Now, you can't require employees to use supplemental paid sick leave when they are getting exclusion pay. So again, those are 2 separate benefits. And this time around, I'm sorry to tell you, there is no direct tax credit, as there was with the FFCRA. So this is just a standalone benefit that you as an employer are providing to your employees. So let's take a look at these 2 little buckets that we have. Well, I know they're big buckets that you're paying for, but the first one is a broad bucket of time where an employee can take time if they are subject to quarantining or an isolation period. They've been advised by a healthcare provider to quarantine. If they're attending an appointment for themselves or a family member to receive a COVID vaccination, if they have symptoms or they're caring for a family member who has symptoms related to COVID vaccine or the booster, sometimes you get one of the jabs and you don't feel so great after, that's what this time can be used for. If the employee has COVID symptoms and they're seeking a medical diagnosis, if the employee is caring for a family member who's required to quarantine, or if a child's school is closed due to COVID on the premises, or their classroom is shut down because there's COVID, that's the time that this first bucket of 40 hours could be used. So this is kind of a broad bucket. Let me show you bucket number 2. It's much more simple. I call this the positive bucket. So the second 40-hour bucket is caring for the employee caring for themselves or a family member who tests positive for COVID. Very simple, very clear. That's 40 hours that they can use. But with this 40-hour bucket, you can request appropriate documentation of a positive test. So the same thing, the employee can take a picture with their phone with the date and timestamp. And you as an employer do have the option of denying this paid leave if the employee does not provide documentation. Now, this is one of those things where I will tell you it's very important you are consistent with this. Make sure you don't not pay a benefit for one person, pay it for somebody else if they don't provide documentation. So again, consistency is key as an employer in California. So a couple of takeaways for things that Jessica and I have been chatting about. Look about health and wellness opportunities, those little perks. They do not have to be huge. Fun things like gift cards to get a drink, or lunches, as Jessica was talking about, or giving some people comp time. Great, they go a long way, and you can do whatever's appropriate for the budget for your workplace. Make sure you update your CFRA policy in your forms. Earlier in the chat box, I dropped a link to our store where we have our DIY handbook template, which has been updated for 2022. It has very clear policies on CFRA. You want to make sure, especially if you're a larger employer, if you have 50 or more and FEMLA and CFRA apply to you, make sure you break those policies apart because they are different. There are different conditions in each of those and different reasons for taking leave. So those should be separate standalone policies now. Also, make sure your managers, I know many of you might have multiple locations, or you might have a big management team, or even if you have a small management team, make sure your managers know who to ask leave of absence questions for. I hear all the time that, well, my employee's mad because the manager told them they couldn't take leave and they really could, and now they're trying to make a complaint against us. So make sure your managers know who to ask questions for when it comes to leave of absence so they don't automatically deny leave, because as Jessica and I have talked about, there are lots of leaves. There's just an acronym soup of leaves that people might be eligible for. So we want to make sure we're always giving our employees any leaves they're entitled to. And then again, make sure if exclusion pay applies or if SPL applies, you are managing those consistently, and make sure again, they're showing up on the pay stub. All right, let's talk about a couple of other considerations here for kind of our home stretch of our labor law update. We're going to talk about some training that's required if you're in the restaurant industry. Record retention, CalSavers deadline was just last week. And then I'm going to throw some penalties and wage statements, reminders at you, and then we'll talk about what's coming. All right, so if you are in a service industry, there is a new requirement. You're probably very familiar with the food handler card if you're in one of these industries. This is kind of the next step. This is the mandatory alcohol server training. And this needs to be done fairly quickly because we're already in July, which is hard to believe, but you need to make sure that your employees are trained in this RBS training by August 31st, or if they're hired after July 1st, within 60 days of the hire date, they need to have this training. They've got to have their card. Now, an alcohol server is anyone who's employed by, and you're going to know if you're an ABC business, but if they are checking IDs, if they are taking customer orders, if they're pouring or delivering alcohol beverages, they all need to have this training. Now, it doesn't apply to individuals at a private event, so that's a separate situation. Also, if there's a public event, for example, if there's a golf tournament going on, someone's driving around, you've got a couple of beer carts going around, you only have to have one certified individual at that event where the alcohol is being served who has this training. So that's a little bit of a leeway there for everybody. Now, it does apply to all licensed establishments. So if you're a restaurant, if you're a winery, if you're a club, again, you're going to know if you're an ABC business. So make sure you're following along with that. Now, the trainers need to be approved by the ABC, and we have a nice little QR code with just a friendly little dinosaur right there. Although I know after everything that Jessica and I have told you, you're probably more interested in the graphic on the right, maybe just taking a swig of one of those things. But if you are in these industries, make sure you get that training up to date for your employees, because as always, you know, you don't want to bring into question having that license. So make sure you're very proactive. And I know you have 60 days to train your employees, but again, I would recommend you do it as quickly as possible, just like harassment prevention, which I'll talk about here in just a second. So this is kind of our last thing for you to think about here when it comes to record retention. And you can put it in the chat box if you want, but I'm just kind of curious how long people think they're supposed to retain employee records. So some of you might shred and delete them the moment the employee walks out the door. Maybe you keep them for a couple of years, maybe you keep them for 4 years, or maybe you're super conservative and you keep them for 7 years. But here's what I want to tell you. It's imperative that you keep these documents at least 4 years. So there have been a lot of changes over the year. And if you've ever seen, we have a record retention sheet, which is somewhat entertaining because it used to say this agency wants them 2 years. This agency wants you to have them for 3 years. This one wants 1 year. And it was kind of all over the board. So it was nice that they consolidated that a little bit. So what they now say is that all applications, personnel records, membership, employment referral records, you keep those for 4 years from the date that record was created or whenever that action took place. Now, if there's something going on with the DFEH investigation or any sort of a legal matter, of course, make sure you retain those records for longer until a statute of limitation runs out or until your attorney says it's clear for you to delete those records. But if there's any pending litigation, we always make sure we hold on to those records for as long as possible. Now, what I used to do when I was an HR manager is just at the end of each year, when an employee would terminate or multiple employees would terminate, I would take all those terminated files, put them in a box, put them in a secure locked location, just like we always lock up our personnel records. And I would just say, destroy 4 years. I had one company that liked to keep them for 7 years post end of year termination. So whenever they terminated during the year, we kept them for 4 years past that time. So however you like to do it, just make sure you're maintaining them for a minimum of 4 years. And then as always, keep all personnel files, even for terminated employees, in a locked and secure location, and then destroy them as appropriate. If you shred them, if you have a bonfire, whatever works for you, do that, but make sure it's a minimum of 4 years. So CalSavers, if you're not familiar with CalSavers, this is a state retirement savings program that private employers can participate in or required to participate in if they do not offer a retirement program. So if you already have a retirement program, you don't have to worry about CalSavers. If you don't have a retirement program, then you should be registered by now with CalSavers. The last deadline was June 30th. So as of last week, you should have made sure you were registered with the state. Now, this applies just if you have 5 or more employees. But again, if you don't have a qualified retirement program, you need to make sure you're registered with CalSavers. Now, their website is very user-friendly. You can go on there and register. You're going to set up a payroll list. This is where you can add your employees, make any changes as appropriate. And that's what you need to do. You're going to make sure your employee gets a CalSavers packet. Now, the rest of it is going to be up to the employee. It's completely voluntary if they want to participate. So it's up to them if they want to, not required. But you as an employer are required to still register. So that means you'll need to stay up to date if there's deductions, contributions that need to be sent into the state, ongoing maintenance when employees terminate, when you hire new employees. You'll need to make sure that is updated. So check out the CalSavers website if you haven't registered yet, if you're required to, if you don't have a retirement program, just to make sure you are being compliant with that. But if you have your own retirement program, you're all good. You don't have to worry about that. So here's a sample of an accurate wage statement. And this is just getting more and more crowded every time we update this. But here's everything that should be on a statement. You want to make sure you have the name and address of the legal entity of your business. You're going to have all the hours worked. You're going to have all the deductions. You also need to have the pay rates. You need to have their regular pay rate. You need to have their overtime pay rate and the appropriate hours that they worked at those rates. Now, what you can see kind of on the left-hand side in the bold underlined red is premium pay. So as you know, if an employee misses a rest period, or if they are denied a rest period, or if their meal period is not taken, or if it's taken late, if there's some sort of rest or meal period violation, you owe that employee 1 hour of pay at their regular rate of pay. This now needs to be listed on your pay stubs. Now, we've been advising employers to do this for years, but now it's a requirement because you want to be able to show on the pay stub, yes, my employee missed 2 lunches. I owe them 2 penalty hours at $25 an hour for a total of $50. So you want to make sure that is a line item on your statement. So again, work with your payroll company, make sure everybody's on the same page as what needs to be on those pay stubs so that you're staying up to date with that. You'll also notice on here, we have SPSL, that's that supplemental paid sick leave. So it's showing that this particular person has used 16 hours of SPSL and their balance is 64. You're only required to show what the hours are that they've used. You can certainly show their balance as well. And as a reminder, for California paid sick leave, that also needs to be on the pay stub. If you don't print those on the pay stub, you're supposed to put in writing to the individual every single pay period what their balances are. So make sure, again, you're being doing your due diligence with that, because you don't want to get into any wage statement violations. That gets to be quite expensive with something we all lovingly know as PAGA. All right, so what are we needing to keep an eye on as we start to cruise into the second half of 2022? As Jessica mentioned, there's some I-9 changes that are coming. I am looking forward to those. They've made some good changes. I still think we can make some more changes on that I-9 form. So we're expecting that new form. But again, she referenced that manual. I think it's 274, Jessica, if I'm not wrong, correct me if I am. But that is a great, very helpful tool for employers to make sure that you are filling out your I-9s correctly. We also always advise, make sure you do an I-9 audit every year so you can filter out any I-9 forms for employees that might have terminated to go in an appropriate folder to be destroyed at the appropriate date. We always do recommend, just a side comment, keep your I-9 separate from the rest of your personnel file. Just have an I-9 file, much easier to manage. That's how you can also keep up to date if any documents are going to expire that need re-verification. And also when employees terminate, it's easier to just pull those out and put those in a different file so you know when to destroy those. We are going to have a free training on the new form. Hasn't been scheduled yet, but keep an eye out for that because it'll be good to hear how we're supposed to be using that new form. Again, COVID supplemental paid sick leave, that SPSL, that is set to expire September 30th. We shall see what happens with that. Not sure. The ETS are set to expire December 31st. So we'll see if we start to wrap up some of these COVID things at the end of the year or if they'll get extended. We'll just have to wait to see what the government decides to do. And then another thing to keep in mind, paid bereavement leave. This has been tossed about for a couple of years, but they do keep talking about making it a requirement that employers provide a paid bereavement leave. Maybe 2 to 3 days is what we've been hearing. It's back on the table, but again, nothing is official, nothing's been signed. I think the governor has until the end of October to make any of those changes. So that's how we'll be able to develop our next labor law update once he finishes signing all of these new laws that might be going into effect. Couple of final reminders for you. As Jessica was talking about, it's so important. I mean, you're talking to HR people, so of course we're going to tell you, you need to have an employee handbook, but you need to have good policies too. We don't need to, you're not required to have an employee handbook, but we recommend you have an employee handbook. But do make sure you're updating your policies. When it comes to CFRA, as we mentioned, that's a big policy update. Remote policies and agreements with your employees who are working remotely, make sure those are all up to date. Take a look at your wellness programs. Think about things that you might be able to do at the end of the year, or maybe it's something you can budget for 2023, but just start thinking of ideas to keep retaining those employees you want to keep with you. CalSavers deadline, it has passed. If you have missed it, make sure you are being proactive and dealing with that as quickly as possible. Now, harassment prevention training. I mentioned that really briefly when I was talking about the alcohol beverage servers, but remember, every 2 years, your employees need to attend harassment prevention training. Your managers need to have a 2-hour training. Non-managers should attend a 1-hour training. Be very proactive with that. So if 2020 was the last time you did that training, make sure 2022 is your year to do that training. Also, if somebody is promoted into a supervisory role, or if you have a new hire within 6 months, you need to make sure that training is done. Again, I would encourage you, make sure that training is done in the first couple of weeks of employment, because you don't want a harassment issue to occur a couple of months down the road and you just didn't get to that training yet. So anything you as an employer can do to show that you're being proactive and you're making sure you're checking off all the boxes on training, any other requirements, is very good for you. You want to make sure you're doing that. And then we have a couple of great series coming up for you this fall. We have something called LEAD, which is a supervisor certification course. That is a 6-week class that takes you through all the fundamental skills that you want to have as a supervisor. It's very interactive. A lot of the HR directors join in on different weeks for that training, and we've got a great training and development team that leads that. And then we're also doing something called HERO, which is really kind of your HR 101. And that's a 4-week class that we'll be doing in October. We're going to cover all the key fundamentals of HR. It's going to be hiring, it's going to be leave of absence, it's going to be performance management, as well as ending the employment relationship. Again, that's a 4-week class. We'd love for you to join us for any of those. And that's great for somebody who's maybe new to HR, somebody who maybe has kind of that dual role of office manager, owner, catch-all, doing it all, or if somebody just wants a refresher. So we encourage you to take a look at those. They're going to be fun classes. So we enjoy doing those with everybody. And if you find you need a little more help, CEA is here to help you. We have a month-to-month membership. If you just want to access all of our forms and have online access, you can do that. We've got a couple of different tiers. So just give us a call if we can ever help you. We know it's so difficult out there, and we're always here to try to make your life a little easier. So give us a call anytime. We can be there for you. And anything else we should talk about, Jessica Osborne?
I think I responded to the questions in the chat box. Just for clarity, if you offer any type of retirement program, then you're okay with CalSavers. You don't have to go through the CalSavers process, but if you offer nothing, then that's when you've got to register. But I would look at their website. Their website is actually quite user-friendly, so I would take a look at that. And then I put a link in the chat box for the Department of Fair Employment and Housing as far as a lot of their family medical leave information. There's the mandatory poster there. They have a fact sheet. Policies tend to be created internally. So for example, our policies and our forms, we created those. So those are member benefits, but there are resources that you can Google, but please do not use the federal forms, especially the federal medical certification form, because the federal medical certification form asks for diagnosis information, and we cannot ask that in California.
No, in California.
That's a no-no. And the M274, which is one of my favorite documents because I'm a robot, I put the link in there. And that's just, if you deal with a lot of I-9 issues and you have a lot of random questions about I-9 compliance, 9 times out of 10, your answer is going to be in that document. So I highly recommend that. Yeah, if you have I-9 issues or questions, please take a look at that. I find that very handy. And keep an eye on our website, because we get people from the USCIS to do an I-9 update, and they're fantastic. And
they're so good.
They answer, and they can answer the questions that most of us can't because they're them, right? So keep an eye on our website for that. And I'll hook up with Nancy and Fumi to get something on our blog to get information about that PFL reimbursement for employers as well.
For sure.
So that's all we got.
Great, thank you. Does anyone have any last questions before we let Jessica and Mary go? Last chance to ask this wealth of knowledge. Any questions you might have? Well, I want to say thank you so much to CEA, to Jessica, to Mary, just the amount of changes that happen within the 6-month period that we do our other update is always incredible. So especially during this time, so many constant small changes. So we're so appreciative of letting you give this to our membership and our contacts. So thank you so much. And yeah, so we said, please take a look at our website, sanfernandovalleychamber.com or chamberstore.com/events. You can register for our events there. And yeah, so thank you so much for coming, everybody. And we will have this, this is a recording, so we'll put it up eventually on our YouTube site, and we'll let you know when we do. And thank you so much. Thank you, ladies.
Have a great day.
Have a great day, everybody.
Bye.